Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series. Take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. This video will be reviewing the monster supplement Wyrms of the Realms, Mythic Encounters, designed by Bryan Holmes with Ashton, Duncan, Cassandra, MacDonald, ERF Jordan, J.A. Valeur, Magnus, Vogel, Noah Grand, and Steve Fidler for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. This review has been sponsored by the publisher, and a review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you are interested in a sponsored review, please reach out via email, Twitter, or Discord, or on my submission form at roguewatson.com. And if you enjoy the content, consider using my affiliate links for online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. I am not well versed in Forgotten Realms lore. I am somebody who essentially came to Dungeons & Dragons with 5th edition. I do have some history with previous editions, but in terms of the overarching lore, if it's not in 5th edition, I'm not very familiar with it. What Wyrms of the Realms primarily does is look at decades of Forgotten Realms lore and all of the named legendary dragons who have existed and appeared in previous source books and in issues of Dragon magazine, and updated and provided all that information for 5th edition. In addition to giving them all the mythic traits and mythic actions, which I believe was introduced in Mythic Odysseys of Theros, but essentially whenever you're fighting a really high-level powerful threat, something that already probably has layer actions and legendary actions and everything, and whenever they are reduced to 0 hit points, they essentially go into a second stage boss fight. Those of us that are familiar with a lot of RPG video games, especially JRPGs, tend to do this, where you're fighting a boss and then all of a sudden it gets, much stronger and gets new attacks and stuff. And that's what happens with all of these creatures. I have previously reviewed other Mythic Encounters books, and the exact same tactic was applied to this monster supplement in providing all those additional mythic actions. And for the most part, I think they work pretty well. Not all of them are super interesting. Like some of them are just, they get an inner strength and they're renewed or something. Like, okay. But some of them are really, really cool. They involve that particular dragon's personality and their power sets and their layer in really cool ways. And the mythic actions help fix a problem that I have with dragons in general. I hate to start off with one of my biggest cons, and I think it's more of a con of 5th edition and less about this book, which is I think dragons are just a little too samey. Like when it comes to fighting dragons, the stat blocks are just so similar that once you fought one dragon, you fought them all, kind of. I mean, yes, the actual CR value can change. These are primarily all ancient dragons or variants of ancient dragons. So you're looking at very top tier like CR 20, 24. There's even some CR 30s. Tiamat is included here, for example, as an actual threat, as well as Bahamut. So you've got all their dragon stat blocks, but they're still kind of similar to one another when it really comes down to their actual stat blocks. So that part is a little bit disappointing. But again, I think that might be a criticism of 5th edition and how it runs dragons, and they're being very, very similar to one another. They'll differ a little bit in terms of their, region and obviously their breath weapon and stuff. And I will say that the mythic actions help solve this problem quite a bit, because one of my complaints about dragon books, and I've complained previously, in fact, I reviewed, what was it called? Eoth Colston's Revised Encyclopedia of Great Animals and Draconic Beings. One of my complaints for that supplement was the fact that all the dragon stat blocks were very similar. They were just dragons have all the same, multi-attack with the bite and the claw and the tail. They have frightful presence. They have their breath weapon, a legendary action. They've got legendary resistance, and they've got legendary actions which involve a tail attack and detecting monsters and doing a wing attack. It's the same fucking thing for every single dragon. The mythic actions, however, help alleviate that, because they do suddenly take into consideration the dragon's specific personalities and their different backstories and histories and power sets. So I think that's a really, really cool offsetting factor, and really adds a lot here. This is a pretty big supplement. It's over 160 pages. And includes over 30 of these legendary, infamous named dragons, which I'm not going to cover every single one of them, but I will go through some so you can kind of see what we're dealing with here. Now, as I mentioned, I'm only familiar with the ones that are basically from 5th edition, and I was happy to have recognized several of them because I have reviewed and looked at literally every adventure that's in 5e so far. So, for example, Abiatres, I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that correctly, the ancient white dragon from Rime of the Frost Maiden. There is Old Gnawbone, who appears in the Crypt Garden Forest. I forget which adventure that's from, but she's in one of, maybe was it princes or princes? Princes also had the shadow dragon that was the drow lady. Klauth and Iamrith and Felgalos from Storm King's Thunder. Mirim from Candlekeep Mysteries is in here. Obviously, I mentioned Tiamat, which is the Tyranny of Dragons storyline. So it's really cool to be able to recognize a lot of these dragons and see that, yes, they are all basically the right kind of dragon they should be, either an adult dragon or an ancient dragon. But we get a little bit of lore from it, which is what I really like to see. And not all of them, some dragons are given a lot more love than others. Some of them have entire paragraphs of cool lore and backstory and history, which I found really interesting and fun to read. It's very well written. And others have like a few sentences, and clearly they weren't given the same kind of attention or love. I just don't know if there's not enough information about them or what. But for the most part, I was very impressed with the level of detail and information out there because, again, as somebody who didn't know much about a lot of these actual famous dragons, because a lot of times when you see a dragon in a 5e book, it's a new dragon, and that information is given like in the context of the story, so it's just whatever you have to work with right there. Whereas these are dragons who are created and ongoing as part of the like ongoing lore of the Forgotten Realms, which makes them very rewarding for people who are into the Forgotten Realms, and then for the DM, you can really play that up in your universe if you want, as an actual, infamous, famous character to interact with and possibly to battle. And these are not all chromatic dragons. There are also a lot of metallic dragons, so ones that are very, fun and good-natured, and you wouldn't necessarily fight them, although we do have stat blocks for them. In fact, I wrote down a summary of the kind of dragons that are included here. There are dragons who are profane cannibals, dragons who are pirate queens, dragons who are undead Draco liches, dragons who are fun-loving thieves, music lovers, underdark assassins, ghostly librarians, and at least one who prefers to spend her time as a famous actress and socialite in Waterdeep. Those are a lot of really cool varieties of dragons, so it's not all just, the classic Tolkien dragon of having the lair and just, hates everybody who tries to get near him and is perfect for, the classic end of the dungeon crawl. There's the dragon, you defeat it and get its treasures. Those do exist, certainly, and they're pretty cool. At least a couple of them are literally almost very Acererak-like, where they just exist to have a lair and test people to come in and try to fight them. But others actually are involved in the story and feel like they would be very fun NPCs to use versus actual, boss fights, for example. All right, so a few we can look at. I do like Bellagos. Where are you, Bellagos? Bellagos is a ancient red dragon who is just an asshole, a grade A asshole. This guy just terrorizes everybody, including other dragons. He rips their wings off and then like forces them to serve him and like guard his own lair, and he's just terrible and just mean as hell. He has two different layers. One of them is an extinct volcano, which is like a hollow spire that's got the bones of a previous dragon, and you're supposed to play it up that you think that's actually Bellagos, but of course he actually just killed that dragon and moved into his spot. And there's another one that's an active volcano that's actually guarded by dragons that have their like wings ripped off and they're cowed, and they follow him purely by fear. I mean, he's just a classic like domineering warlord as a dragon. And the layer actions involve like earthquakes and magma erupting from the ground and volcanic gases. I mean, just volcano is just an awesome place for a dungeon crawl in general. His magma trait is, because he's all about, volcanoes and fire, is he's actually like covers himself in magma, and that heals him. So all of these mythic traits have a similar quality in that they don't trigger until you reduce them to 0 hit points, which means first you have to battle this normally pretty high-powered threat, right? These are almost all ancient dragons, slight variants of ancient dragons, which is about CR 20 to 25, I think. Again, there are some that are really high, and then there are a few, like the actual Waterdeep actress is like a CR 13 or something, so a few of them are actually a little bit lower relatively. But most of them are ancient dragons, so it's already a huge fight, and you can just run that fight. But if you want to use the mythic quality, if you've really got, high-powered tier 4, party members, and you want to go all about this, then you can trigger their second stage boss fight, which means whenever they're reduced to 0 hit points, they essentially regain, I believe, about half their hit points. However, half of them are hit points and half of them are temporary hit points. And the only reason I think that matters is because once the temporary hit points are reduced, or while they have temporary hit points, they do some other thing. So they might be spewing darkness everywhere, or get some kind of extra powerful ability, or gain new spells or something. In this case, Bellagos is becomes like bathed in magma, and it ends up automatically dealing fire damage to anybody that attacks him. In addition to that, once they go into mythic mode, so they're on that second stage boss fight and they essentially regain their hit points and you have to refight them, they gain additional legendary actions called Mythic Actions, which is really awesome because I find that dragon legendary actions are really boring, relatively. And again, once you fought one, you fought them all, because they all have almost to the letter the exact same legendary actions, right? They can detect as a legendary action, which only matters if your entire party is going visible or stealthing or something. They can make a tail attack, which is fine, or they can do a kind of AoE like wing beating attack and knock everybody around them. That's fine too. They gain all new mythic actions though when they're going to mythic mode, and this is where all of them change quite a bit depending on what their certain dragon is. So in the case of Bellagos, he can cast spells as a mythic action, including Hold Monster, Melf's Minute Meteors, and Choking Claw, which is a new spell. This supplement includes, I wrote down the number, over 80 new boons, mythic spells, and mythic items. These are used as themed rewards for all of these dragons, which is awesome. So if you're actually fighting and defeat these dragons, including their mythic versions, then you should be rewarded with thematic items that are kind of tied to those dragons. Usually, like maybe, especially if they're like based on a certain item that they've got. Like there's one dragon who's all about like orbs of scrying, and so you can get an orb from them, or gems that play music or something. Or it'll just be something like a fire staff for Bellagos. It'll just be something that has to do with whatever their whole deal is. And you can also earn a spell that is newly created in the supplement, which is really cool. I mean, magic items are just fun in general, but these are a really great list of magic items. I'll show them to you closer once we've gotten through the dragons. But that's a really cool factor. And so one of the new spells you can do is this Choking Claw, which is basically similar to a Big B's Living Hand, but a fucking giant dragon claw, which is cool. He can also just use his fire breath while flying at the same time, kind of using that action plus a movement, or as a legendary action, keep in mind, a mythic action, but same thing. Or he can just cause magma to burst out of the ground, essentially getting another use of one of his layer actions as a legendary action. So it does a really cool job of playing up that theme, and I'm really thankful these mythic actions are here, because otherwise I think, again, I don't think these dragons would be very interesting to fight, at least in their stat block, if it weren't for those mythic actions, because I think they've got such cool histories, and the layer actions are very cool. The layer actions help, do that theme, but in terms of the dragon's actual prowess, unless they have spells, which not every dragon is a spellcaster, they don't have a lot of unique qualities that really reflect and take advantage of the fact that these are named bosses. These aren't just, an ancient red dragon. This is Bellagos, the evil warlord, domineering, just cruel, torturous red dragon who's been the terror of other dragons around him. So I'm very thankful that those mythic actions are there. Let's see. Other ones I want to highlight is, let's look at Dargathoth. That's a cool name too. It's page, right there. Dargathoth is a black dragon who is a Draco Lich, which is awesome. I kind of wish there were more Draco Liches. I just love that his breath weapon, not only does it deal a ton of damage, but it actually creates zombies and skeletons in the same action, which is great. You don't have to even spend an action like Raising Dead. You can just breathe out his, it's called Raising Breath, which is kind of dumb, but it does a huge, con save for bludgeoning damage. A torrent, he's literally spilling out bones, and then those bones form into skeletons and zombies. Oh, that's so great. I love it. And then once he goes into mythic mode, then he can use all these new mythic actions, including he can just recharge his breath weapon. He can cast spells as part of a legendary action. He can use his paralyzing claw, which is a new attack that is not part of his normal multi-attack. Or he can just command all these undead to move forward and attack as part of a legendary action. Very cool. And this one works very well because he kind of falls apart and then reforms as part of his mythic action. And some of them do that very well. They have that cool two-step process. I know like the Shadow Dragon, for example, when you fight her, she just looks like a black dragon, and then she kind of, falls apart, and then smoke wisps up, and she's a Shadow Dragon. For the one, I just want to actually go to her. It's Jalenvalos. Let's see, page 16. And yes, I have to write down all my notes and page numbers because for these giant-ass products. So she, for her first when you first fight her, she's actually just a person. Like she prefers to be a socialite, an actress, into politics and really working the city of Waterdeep. Like nobody really knows she's a dragon, and her lair is actually the theater, which I think is amazing. And there's all these different like scenes and plays that can play around, and all these that are reflected in her lair actions, which is really, really awesome. So you just fight her as a kind of CR13 spellcaster, but then when you reduce her to 0 hit points, it's revealed that she's a fucking dragon. So her mythic form is literally just her dragon form, which is really cool. Even though she's only CR13, she still gets legendary actions and mythic actions, even though mythic actions aren't that great. They basically have to do with casting, a little bit of a spell, or she can recharge her breath weapon. But I just think that's a really cool play on, and it really works whenever they go in. Like, it's a true like 2-stage boss fight. Like I said, some of them are just that person, that dragon digs deep and finds a renewed source of energy. It's kind of a bullshit way of saying, okay, now we're starting our second stage. But others, I think it's baked in a little bit better than that, so that's kind of fun. There are dragons, and that's an example of one that you might not fight normally because it's not really hostile. Hundara is one of the ones that creates a lair specifically asking for, people to come and try to attack his lair, which I think is pretty fun. Galaderos has created like this Amazon like troop of warrior women, and he's like the mascot or patron of. So you normally never even really encounter him normally, but he's got his own like kind of, I don't know, layer is not even the right word, like a base of operations, and one of his mythic actions is just to summon like a human champion who appears beside him and fights alongside him. Again, these are good-natured dragons you wouldn't necessarily be fighting, but hey, sometimes it might come up, or maybe you got an evil party that wants to fight good dragons. I'm not gonna judge you. One cool thing, so all of these dragons are from previous either issues of Dragon Magazine or from previous adventures or modules or source books. The exception is there is at least one. I think there's only the one, but still, there's plenty here. But there is one that is never before seen and yet was originally created, I believe, by Ed Greenwood. I'm trying to get there. I believe it's page 101. Yeah, this one. Orith Drown. Mythic Worms of Realms would like to thank Ed Greenwood for digging through his endless supply of realms information to provide. Orith Drown was slated for one of the Worms of the Realm articles in Dragon Magazine, but was moved onto a project that was never released. So a never released dragon that was originally designed by Ed Greenwood has now been created in 5th edition. And this is actually a really unique dragon. It's a ghost dragon, essentially, that can split itself up into like little will-o-wisps. And that's kind of reflected in its stat block by allowing it to split into these other spheres of light that essentially all act as himself. So he can just be in multiple places at once at the same time. And as his mythic action, he just goes into full-on, all the lights pull themselves into the proper form of the silver dragon. So initially you're, I think, supposed to be fighting just all these little will-o-wisps, essentially, although they all have like dragon stat blocks. And then after that, they coalesce into this fully formed dragon who has crazy big spell casting. What is it? He's got 9th level spells with like Time Stop and Globe of Invulnerability and all those fun spells, which could make it a really, really fun encounter to battle. So really neat idea here to include a dragon that is actually never technically existed in a printed out book before, which is really neat. So Orith Drown, wanted to highlight that one. One of my favorites is, which this is a dragon that I've heard about. I don't know where I've heard about it from, other than the fact that I've been reviewing D&D products for years. But this is, I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this name right, Voregamanthar, which is a black dragon who exists in the Mare of Dead Men's Swamp. And the big twist is this dragon actually has a twin. These are twin, like, it's got to be ancient, right? Ancient black dragons who it's kind of like the prestige thing where nobody knows they're actual like twins involved, and you only ever see one of them. So the actual boss fight is you fight both of them, but when one of them dies, the other one then digs deep and becomes even more powerful and regains all these hit points and gain these new traits, and basically just goes like completely feral and enraged and goes after you. But I just thought it was really cool because I actually remember this dragon, although I don't think it's from 5th edition adventure. I don't know where I got them from, but Really neat idea to have just a black dragon whose big twist is that they are twins, and they've got these legendary crowns that they're trying to search for because they were part of these twin rulers, and they're trying to find the other crown. And that crown is, of course, a mythic item that you can get as loot from these dragons as part of that unique loot that you can grab. So a brief example of ones that have, I mean, this is an example of one that has a great history. Like, look, it's a full page of history and information for these black dragon twins who are searching the swamp for this magic crown. We also get all this amazing, cool, full-page dragon art for every single entry here. Really, really fun if you're into dragons. Fantastic art throughout. Some of them aren't given that kind of attention to detail, though. I didn't write down the page number for this one, but shoot, it was... Oops, we ran to the end. Started with a T. Let's go to the T, because I'm not going to try to pronounce all these names. It wasn't Tiamat. I believe it was this guy, Thalagrit. Poor Thalagrit. He's just a know-it-all dragon. Really cool artwork here, but he only gets like 2 little paragraphs, and it's just he's a smarty pants that knows a lot of things about stuff. I like those ideas, actually. He's got a good memory, remembers everything. Otherwise, he doesn't really care about what's going on. He's always looked at the past. There's no real backstory here. There's no real history. There's barely a hint of a personality. Nothing really given. So not every dragon is given the full-on, like, full page of history and information. Some of them are just barely even touched on. Also, one weird organizational thing is nowhere does it actually say what kind of dragon these dragons are. That's something that I noticed as somebody who's a relative newcomer to all the dragons of 5e. I was like, okay, what kind of dragon is Thalagrit? Because I have to... The only way I could figure it out is by looking at their breath weapon and then looking back and seeing what dragons have what breath weapons. Or the easiest thing to do is look at the Dragonborn thing. And that was the only way I could do it, is like reverse engineer. It's just never mentioned like specifically what kind of dragon, in terms of what kind of chromatic or metallic dragon these actual dragons are. I feel like there should have been somewhere in the stat, and maybe it's a failing of the stat block, just doesn't say specifically, or maybe I missed it, like black dragon, blue dragon, bronze dragon, gold dragon. Because sometimes if the picture isn't quite clear and I don't know the dragon personally, which most of the time I don't, then I wasn't actually aware of it. I didn't put that as an official con, but just as kind of an organizational aside, I feel like somewhere in the stat block at least it should specifically say what kind of fucking dragon they are, because that does kind of matter versus me having to determine that from their stat block. Oh, by the way, do you like Tiamat? Because Tiamat's in here. Now, we do see these stat blocks already exist in 5e, right? Like Tiamat, Iamrith, Felgalos, Clouth. I guess it's all the dragons from Storm King's Thunder. Already exist in 5e. We already have those stat blocks. So they're just, from what I can understand, copied and pasted here. But except for the mythic actions, those are all new for all of these creatures. And as I mentioned, the mythic actions are very cool. They really add a lot to these dragons. They help, reflect those personalities quite well. So I think it's very much worth checking out those mythic actions for sure. And then the items and spells, I think, is a great addition. It's really, first of all, it's just cool to have new spells and items in general, but the fact that these are all specifically themed towards those dragons. Every single dragon has, I think, an average of 2 magic items and 1 spell that it can add as a specific reward that's thematically tied to that particular dragon. So there are spells that can melt bones. They bestow a dragon breath weapon. As I mentioned earlier, there's one that's basically Big B's Dragon Claw. You can create portals. You can consume dragon eggs to gain maximum hit dice. Hello, Clouth, you weird fucking cannibal. It's hard to eat. Basically eating fetuses. It's fucked up, man. Mythic items, there are crowns that grant spells, daggers that have vicious mockery already implanted, necklaces that auto-stabilize you, cloaks of shape-changing, and a dimensional elevator. We've got portable libraries, god-slaying weapons, rings of invisibility. Thank you, Tolkien. There's also Eldensar the Dragon Blade, which is almost a whole nother... it's not a dragon, but it's an ascension item that... essentially levels up if you follow its tenets of killing evil dragons and keeping the dragon clean, or keeping the dragon blade clean and sharp. And its magic item actually awakens into different, more powerful versions, which is a friggin' awesome idea. I love it. And that becomes like a whole character's goal could be, their whole character arc could be just, following this blade and following its tenets and trying to get it more powerful. I think that's a really cool feature. I would love to have entire supplements that were based around these kind of awesome mythic items. So really, really great list of magic items and spells, in addition to having all of those freaking stat blocks available. Freaking phenomenal product. Let's go over my pros and cons for Wyrms of the Realms. Pros: over 30 epic stat blocks, dragon stat blocks with legendary actions, layer actions, and new mythic actions. And pro: each dragon has a highly thematic mythic trait to enter their second stage. Most of the time it's really good. Some of them, like I said, it's just I dig deep and find the power within, which, you know, is kind of a trope of a lot of like superheroes, like how they just have to get more powerful in that moment. But others, it is very cool. Like their scales are awashed with magma, or they discorporate into multiple forms, or they coalesce into a single form, or they bleed out and become a shadow thing, or they're a person who transforms into a dragon. Like there are a lot of better ones too, but in all cases I think the mythic stuff does fit the dragons pretty well. Each dragon has a full page artwork, which is awesome. Thank you very much. Even though I don't know if these all are original art, I don't think they are, but it's still nice to have artwork, and it's nice to show off, especially for, you know, when you've got mythic dragons like this. You absolutely should have art that shows them off. Notations that provide further reading in older source books and issues of Dragon Magazine where these dragons first appeared, which are all these little italicized sidebars on the side, which very helpfully point out what issue it's from. And, you know, if you want to have a basically where did we get this from, you can go look at those older sources, which is nice. And it clues me into the fact that these are, you know, well steeped in Forgotten Realms lore. And pro: over 80 new boons, mythic spells, and mythic items as rewarding loot. I was very impressed. Those were not afterthoughts. Those were very purposely tied to all their different dragons as specific loot, which would be very highly rewarding for players who managed to survive and take on these extremely powerful threats. My only con is that despite their varying history, personality, and powers, most of the dragon stat blocks are still very similar to one another. And that's, again, partly a con of just 5e in general and how they do dragons, but the designers essentially didn't want to rebuild the dragon, so they just took primarily the ancient dragon, you know, tweaked it a few times for a few different creatures, but mainly the way that they, in my opinion, fixed the dragons was with the mythic actions, and those mythic actions really help alleviate that problem of all the dragons playing very similar to one another. Now they suddenly all have these really cool abilities that reflect the, you know, if they're, you know, well versed in spell casting, or if they've got allies, or if they can use, you know, their shadow magic or their undead forces, or the lava that they control over, or something like that is finally reflected in those mythic actions, which makes that a much more interesting fight. I would probably go farther than that and really just redesign these dragons so I can bake those mythic actions into the actual stat blocks, but that's probably going beyond what 5e is looking for in terms of fighting dragons. Final verdict: Wyrms of the Realms thrusts legendary dragons from decades of Forgotten Realms lore into 5th edition, granting them powerful new mythic traits and actions, creating endgame stat blocks worthy of their infamy. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel, and you can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. Thank you.